This is the smartest purchase any new flight simmer can make. If you're new to flight simulation, you're probably staring at a wall of flight simulation gear, confused as hell, either thinking you need to drop $1, $3, maybe even $5,000 just to get started, or this just looks too hard. And I get it. Everywhere you look, people are talking about throttles, yokes, avionics, cockpits, rudders, and setups that almost cost as much as the average family car. Then you have this, the Thrustmaster T.Flight Microsoft Flight Simulator Edition. This $100 stick and throttle combo is not just good enough to get you started, it's going to save you thousands of dollars in the long run, especially if you start falling down the rabbit hole. But before I explain why this could potentially save you bucket loads, let me show you what you actually get for your money. As far as features go, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly since it's nothing you can't read on the website. This HOTAS is obviously white, and whilst I understand that from a branding perspective, I do actually worry about the longevity. I mean, really, how long before it goes that kind of grotty yellow colour? So there is that to take into consideration. You have 14 buttons all up, plus your trigger and your hat switch, which is preset to work with views. Press to the left, it looks to the left, press to the right, looks right. It also talks about 10-bit precision on the stick. Now, that's nothing really that special, but absolutely adequate for what this is. And honestly, most people wouldn't even be able to tell the difference anyway. We have two ways to control the rudder, and that's important, either through the throttle rocker or the twist of the stick. Now, I'm a big fan of the throttle rocker, as I tend to find with the twist grip sticks, I inadvertently make rudder inputs without knowing it sometimes. So for me, the addition of this throttle control with this rocker switch, brilliant. This is Xbox compatible, although I haven't tested that myself. You can detach both parts. I'll cut to some overlay here and let you see how that's done. It's a little bit clunky in two parts with the connection cable that runs across the desk. You know what? I reckon most people will just keep them attached just like this. There's a mild detent at 50% on the throttle. I think this is for the Airbus climb gate. Now, I don't really fly the big jets, so if you happen to know about that, let me know in the comments. On the underside, there's a tension adjustment knob, and this works fairly well. And also some cable routing just to keep your cables nice and tidy. You'll find a connection at the front for attaching T-Flight rudders just in here. Honestly though, I wouldn't bother with them. You just don't need them with something like this. Save your money for a better set of rudders further into the hobby, and that falls in line with something I'm going to talk about in a second. There are some basic rubber pads on the bottom, and they actually do a fantastic job of keeping the HOTAS fairly well planted. It's really quite stable on the desk. Surprisingly stable, actually, until you separate them. When separated, the pitch axis on the base can just slightly move if you're overly rough, but this is very common with all low to mid-tier sticks that just sit on a desk. I don't think it's an issue until you might fly some more aggressive planes like a fighter jet. If you're flying commercial or GA, it's not really going to move around on you at all. Now that covers the main features, but when it comes to design, it feels a little bit lackluster or old. And there's nothing inherently wrong with it, it just looks a little bit dated. And it is dated. This is just a branded version of the older T-Flight that's been out for years. Ergonomically speaking, it feels pretty good. My hands are 9.5 inches from here to here, and both the grip and the throttle feel well sized in my hands. Worth noting at this point though, there is no grip size adjustment. I think smaller hands will be fine, but if your hands are a fair whack larger than mine, I'd maybe think twice. So we know this stick is just $100. We know it has all the main features you might need, and design-wise, it's reasonable. So that leads me into the build quality. We have to keep in mind here this stick is strictly in the budget category. It's really at the lower end in terms of flight sim products. And although this is an older design, the way the stick feels, there's nothing really to complain about. It's just good. It feels smooth enough both on the throttle and the stick. The pitch axis detent is a little bit more muted than the roll, but that's absolutely fine. Now, I did forget to mention that although there are two ways to control the rudder, the stick or the twist grip, you can actually lock that off by tightening the screw underneath. So if you do want to use the rocker for the rudder, 100% you're going to lock this stick off. Now moving on, I did mention earlier it's pretty stable, and it is particularly stable when connected together and you've got both hands on the HOTAS. It gives you enough controls and buttons to really experience flight simulator at a sort of deeper level than you're going to get with a control pad. And that's what you're looking for with something like this. So after all that, why do I say this is one of the flight sim peripherals that could save you thousands as a new flight simmer? And why do I believe this could be the most important purchase you ever make? As someone that's new to flight sim, the options are absolutely endless and it can be super confusing. What happens to most of us is we either get bored and give up. In that case, if you bought one of these, you've only lost $100, or you fall in love with flight simulation, and this is where this little stick will pay you back 10 times over. As you start to progress and fall down the rabbit hole, most simmers will eventually flow into a path that pushes them in a certain direction. If you want to break that down simply, it would be GA flying helicopters, military aircraft, or commercial jets. Further to that, a lot of people find that's even still too generic and will eventually dial their setup right down to a specific aircraft type. This is where I see so many new simmers making purchasing mistakes. People see these setups like what I've got in the sim room just over here, and they go all out in the beginning only to find out they're heading down a different path inside or as far as the simulator itself goes, and the equipment they purchased doesn't suit the way that their interest has developed. That's when something like the T-Flight will get you deep enough and really help you figure out what sort of direction you're heading in or likely to head. And following from that, you are going to make much more, say, educated or experienced buying decisions depending on where your interest starts to head. Now, let's move back to the T-Flight and go through some of the pros and the cons, and we'll start with the pros. Right off the bat, you've got to talk about the price. $100, or I think it could be $110 with these new tariffs. I'm not sure, the price is kind of up and down a little bit. Secondly, you've got more than enough controls for a good experience. There's two options to control yaw and rudder input. The tension control for the stick is quite nice, and the stick axis feels good for the price. It's Xbox and PC compatible, and with something like this, you can explore everything flight sim kind of offers in one simple setup. Now for the cons, I'm betting that this is not going to stay clean or very white for long. And secondly, the throttle axis could do with a little bit more weight. It's just got, you know, it's a little bit light feeling, but that's being especially harsh at this kind of price point. The Thrustmaster T.Flight is a truly one and done approach for beginners. It takes all the confusion out of buying flight sim gear, but most importantly, it gives you a real low-level entry point and lets you develop and start to understand the landscape before you make any expensive purchasing decisions. And yes, this will most likely end up at the back of a cupboard after a year or two, but not before it's done its job. As a new flight simmer, avoid expensive mistakes. Start with something like this and figure out what you love, then upgrade with more purpose.